but I had not found a tributary that could have deposited the money into the Columbia, and then, of course, it float with the current to its discovery location. So what that tells me is we searched the wrong area. It had to be further south and further east.
Interesting.
So we can draw that conclusion from the money, which is, I find it to be very exciting because that leads to a whole new area to search.
Hi, welcome back to another segment of D.B. Cooper Through the Lens of Logic. Why the FBI has failed to solve this case. In the last video, I talked about 3 ways to resolve a paradox. You could say that the statements do not really imply a contradiction, that the puzzle itself is not really a contradiction, or the third way is that the premises are not really true or can't be true together. And I said the FBI and enthusiasts have chosen one of these ways to resolve the case. And that way is actually option number 3. The first 2 options have been totally ignored. So on a standardized test, if you were to take the GMAT or LSAT, you might come across a question known as a paradox question. And the test takers know that if they give a test taker a paradox, there's a natural bias in their mind that says, hey, one of these things has to be wrong. They can't both be correct at the same time because they're contradicting each other. And so they know that they know that there's a bias in people's minds to tend to veer that way. And so what they do is they create wrong answers geared around this option 3. And every time it's wrong. The test makers actually like to resolve the paradoxes the first 2 ways. There are some paradoxes though, such as like I pointed out in the last video, the liar's paradox, where the only way to resolve it is option 3. But let's look at this. Now, what are the odds that option 3 is actually the answer, the solution to the Cooper mystery? Well, we have to rule out one of the top 2 in the matrix, one of the bottom 2 in the matrix. At least one. Now, you could rule out both of them, or you could rule out both of them, but for mathematical reasons, we're just going to examine one or the other, because actually both is contained in that calculation. So here I have the logical outline of that, what that would look like. We're going to look at each quadrant separately. So quadrant 1, here's what has to happen for this premise to be incorrect. You have to believe that the Ingrams were basically liars. They didn't find the money at Tina's bar, and that the story of how they found the money was actually wrong. And that's basically it. So I'm going to go ahead and say, what's the probability of that? Maybe I'll give you 1% chance that the Ingrams were lying. I find them to be very credible. I have no reason to believe that they would make this up. I mean, they actually did come forward after all. I mean, why make it up? Now, if you were to talk to Brian Ingram himself, I'm sure he would say there's a 0% chance. But see, he was there, he knows. I was not there, I don't know. I can only go off, I can only speculate. Quadrant 2. If this quadrant is false, you have to believe that the FAA, the U.S. Air Force, the FBI, they all screwed up royally. Okay, how? Well, they're talking real time with the cockpit, and they have to screw up when these oscillations are occurring, when the pressure bump is occurring. The pilots, upon recollection, have to think they have to screw it up by massive amounts. They have audio tapes of this, and they have radar tapes of this. They have to think that the plane's way off. The combination of factors, so 5+ minutes on jump time, and or 10+ miles to the east. A combination of those. So, and at the bottom here I said the error can only be on one tail of standard deviation. So if you're looking at a distribution, it's only on one. You're only really talking about one error. We're not talking about 5 minutes being off, but being 5 minutes early, where the jump was actually 8:05. We're talking about wanting it to push it back past 8:11. And the same goes with the flight path. We're not talking about 10 miles just to the east, or we're not talking about 10 miles to the west, we're talking about 10 miles to the east. So we're actually talking about 10 standard deviations in one direction. So the probability of this, and mind you, I base this on the fact that this was the most watched flight easily of the year. I mean, you had the military monitoring, you had the FBI monitoring, you had FAA, you had PDX, you had everybody was watching this plane as closely as they could. What's the odds they screwed up massively? 1 in a billion, I'd say. Okay? Number 3, quadrant. If this is false, you must believe that a well-respected geologist named Leonard Palmer from the area was both capable and also, not only was he capable of screwing this up, but he actually did screw it up. And at the bottom there you'll see that I said you have to believe that the layer that they actually did find was not the 1974 layer that is known to have been put on the sand, but it was actually a layer from before 1971, and that the actual 1974 layer had eroded, but the 71 layer, or pre-71 layer, never eroded. Okay? Now, you can solve that by going with the Tom K theory, which is there was no layer at all, which brings us back to the top choice here of Leonard Palmer totally screwing this up, even though it was something very easy. What's the odds of this? I'm going to say 1 in 1,000 that he might screw this up, and I'm being very generous. This guy was a PhD. He was very well respected. He knew the area. This was a very easy task. You saw from the pictures, this guy took this job very seriously, and I happen to trust his opinion. I have no reason to disagree with it. Quadrant 4. If this quadrant's false, then you must believe that the organic material in the money itself was able to withstand a very damp, very wet, very moist northwest environment for 8+ years. Okay, and that it would only show, and I'm going to say this in a way, that only show a very minor amount of wear that was shown. Now I realize that money was rotted, it was worthless, it was, I mean, it couldn't be spent, it was brittle, there was pieces breaking off. I realize that. But mind you, that damage had to happen on the beach itself, most of it, because otherwise that's just going to come down the river and it's breaking apart, it's molded. And why is it only that moldy? So you have to also believe that the rubber bands can last 8+ years with repeated UV exposure and perpetual hot-cold cycles, which are basically going to disintegrate the rubber bands. But yet they didn't disintegrate until after the Ingrams handled it. So they were actually in, relatively speaking, good shape for given how the kinds of environment there are. Now, what are the odds of this? I'm going to say 1 in 100,000, because I really think that this is an overlooked aspect of this case, and I think that if you really were to get down to the nitty-gritty, you're actually talking close to 1 in infinity, because I just don't think it's possible. But I'm going to be kind and give you 1 out of 100,000 chance that this is errant. So here's a summary of the odds: 1 in 100, 1 in a billion, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100,000. One thing I want to point out: those top two, the top quadrant is the Ingrams being a liar. So mind you that, okay? So that one I'm getting the most leeway to.